May 1940. The French army, considered the finest fighting force in the world, faces an impossible enemy. German troops march for 72 hours straight. No sleep, no rest, no food. They attack with superhuman endurance, their eyes wide, their movements manic. The French generals cannot understand what they're witnessing. What the Allies didn't know was that the Wehrmacht wasn't just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with drugs, crystal meth, millions of pills, distributed by their own government. This is the story of how Nazi Germany became the world's first narco-state, and how one man's addiction reveals the twisted truth of Hitler's empire.
On the weight of playing a character that's a Nazi, the second in charge.
Mm-hmm.
That's, what was that? That's heavy, right?
Yeah, but that thrill comes from that thing of saying this challenge is so big, I don't know if I can do this. And then so part of you goes, I should leave that aside. And then the other voice goes, let's just have a go.
Yeah.
Let's have a go, see what we can do, you know. And see someone like Göring, it's, you know, that word nuance is coming up a lot today, because we can look at him in the stark sort of caricature version that a lot of people have in their minds of who he was. But that against the reality of his life and how he grew up, how he was educated, what his experiences were, who he really was as a man. There's a lot more to Göring than just looking at this going, oh, bad man, Nazi, you know. He, one thing I find fascinating, when he was a kid at school, he was like one of the dumbest students in his class at a normal school. And because of his sort of continuous failure, as a punishment, he got sent to military school. In military school, he was a top student because it was stuff that interested him. He comes out of school pretty much on the dawn of the First World War, has his first military experience in the infantry as a young officer, gets wounded, and realizes that standing on the ground on a battlefield is not really the right place for him. What's interesting him is what keeps going on overhead. So he manufactures a way to get himself assigned to a fighter squadron. Is supposed to turn back up for duty with his infantry squadron, but sort of, you know, manufactures a way to keep him associated with the fighter squadron, learns how to become a pilot while he's doing that. And at a certain point in the war, they're losing more pilots than they train. So they go, he knows how to fly, he can be a pilot. Finishes the First World War with 22 kills, air-to-air kills. That's 3 times a fighting ace. And he's also, because he recently passed in battle, at the end of the First World War, he's in charge of the Baron von Richthofen, the Red Baron's squadron, which is the pinnacle of the German Air Force. So here he is as a young man. He's finishing that First War experience. And he is a fair dinkum, which means true. He is an actual war hero. And so through the 20s, he's on cigarette cards in Germany. You buy a packet of cigarettes and there's a picture of Hermann Göring. You know?
Wow.
So, and he goes into that political environment, that post-Versailles environment, with a very definite belief in his country as being something special, and he wants to make a contribution to lifting his country out of the mire that it's currently in. So he starts looking for a political connection and ends up going upstairs in a coffee house in Munich, I think it was, and hearing a fellow called Adolf Hitler talk. And realizes that he has a lot in common with this guy, or he sees things and knows that Hitler was a soldier. It's a funny thing we put into the movie at one point, because there's a speech about Rami Malek makes about Hitler being a failed painter and a not very good soldier. And I think the response I gave Göring at the time, which is not in the film, but he talks through Hitler's
Let's talk about Hitler.
Actual military record. And yeah, he didn't rise above Lance Corporal, but he turned down promotion 3 different times. He won an Iron Cross in 1914, and then he won a second one in 1918 and doing things that were showing such extreme courage that he was awarded the Iron Cross. And he delivered messages on the battlefield. He would take the messages from headquarters and take it to the frontline troops and then bring their response back, things like that. So at one point in time I had Göring say, you call him a failed painter, but maybe he got to a certain point in his life where there were more important things to address than painting. So, nuance.
I thought it was also fascinating that you guys delved into the fact that he was an addict.
Yeah, we only touch on it a little bit.
Yeah.
But that is crazy. There's a really good book. I can't remember the name.
Norman Ohler.
Blitzed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, which
He's been
gave
on the
me
podcast
a lot of information. Because
Brilliant.
When Göring was arrested, he had something like 40,000 pills on him.
40,000.
In his car, right? He had a habit of 40 to 50 a day. Right, so you look at him, and you can see it when you know that fact, and you start looking at photographs. You can see him kind of leave the planet at a certain point, where he's just off his tits all the time. From about 42 onwards, he doesn't really have Adolf's ear anymore. Goebbels, Himmler, Heydrich, they've all taken those positions. The things that he promised he could do with the Luftwaffe didn't actually come off, as strongly. They didn't know it at the time. But that's the Enigma machine, everything, the code's being broken. So no matter what they did, they were always being second-guessed. So, Hitler's trust of him was adjusted a little bit. And I also sort of liken it to him knowing he's going to get stabbed. So he just doesn't bother going to the place where he would get stabbed. So he does a whole bunch of other stuff, and he keeps his authority, but he's not in the center of things anymore
because of the pills. A big part of it.
Big part of it is personal safety, because he thinks like he's no longer has the definitive ear and trust of his leader. The pills overtake his lifestyle, and he decides to, interest himself in other things for the greater good of Germany, like the collection of great works of art and things like that. But there's a lot of things in this story that are just bigger once you start looking at it and examining them. They're way bigger than what we know or what we commonly understand. And that's what I was looking for, to try and find a way to, understand his base motivations. And at the end of the day, he, in his own way, he's a pure patriot. Just so happens to be a sort of a set of beliefs or whatever that most of us in a Western world would call abhorrent.